Hi guys, and welcome to my vlog on skills versus capacities in the weight room. This vlog will observe two athletes performing a back squat pattern and two athletes performing a hinge pattern, both of which will feature one athlete with a lack of coordination and motor control to execute the pattern optimally, and another athlete whose performance of the pattern is limited by their individual capacity. The first movement observed will be the squat pattern for the athlete with a skill deficit. As we can see here in the video, athlete 1 is attempting to perform a back squat pattern with kinematics quite far from the technical model. Breaking the movement pattern down, we can observe the fact that the athlete is attempting to find the right movement pattern and failing due to his lack of skill. The athlete attempts to reach parallel in the squat and fails to do so, and in an attempt to do this loses the stability and integrity of his thoracolumbar spine and also loses contact with his heel and the floor. This loss of heel contact is then corrected for in order to maintain the strong base of support through self-cueing by this athlete. However, a large amount of trunk lean and flexion at the lumbar and thoracic regions of the spine is still exhibited. Observing this athlete's squat pattern in the frontal plane demonstrates a large degree of knee valgus, which highlights a lack of knowledge to externally rotate the hips and sit back into the squat. This compensatory mechanism is accompanied by a large extent of trunk lean, which exposes the athlete's spinal structures to inappropriate axial load if we were to load this athlete through the pattern. As such, in order to progress the athlete to a place where we can load the back squat pattern, a regression-based intervention is necessary. The first exercise would be the pole squat. The athlete here is cued to keep the chest up and out and brace through the core, which results in a more favourable spinal position as demonstrated here in this video. The athlete is also cued to screw the feet into the ground, drive the knees out over the line of the big toe, and finally to use the pole to reach parallel depth whilst maintaining that spinal position. Once satisfied that this athlete has established the correct movement pattern in kinematics, we can then progress the athlete onto a low box squat. Here we see the athlete demonstrating a squat pattern closer to the technical model here, initiating with the hips, sitting down, externally rotating the hips to touch the box at the bottom of the squat before standing up. This exhibits that the athlete is starting to work towards a movement pattern without any need for an external cue during the back squat. In summary, the athlete's skill deficit led to a large amount of variability throughout the squat pattern, and as such, the aforementioned intervention was designed to increase coherence with the technical model of the squat. The next stage of this video will observe the squat pattern for the athlete with the capacity deficit. In contrast to the first athlete, this athlete appears to have a knowledge of the skill but does not possess the capacity in order to reach or attain a favourable movement pattern. The video shown here evidences an inability to reach parallel in the squat and exhibits a large amount of trunk lean relative to the shin angle. Further to this, it's clear that the athlete exhibits minor lumbar extension, which when you combine this with the trunk lean, it's evident these are compensatory movement patterns both to reach a greater depth during the squat and to keep the chest up and out as dictated by the technical model. In order to hone in on the origin of this compensatory movement pattern, I've used a heel raise squat here in order to limit the impact of restricted dorsiflexion on the kinematics of the squat pattern. However, as is evident here, we can see there is still a large extent of trunk lean relative to the shin angle. Observation of the athlete's initial squat pattern evidences anterior tibial translation, which indicates the fact that the athlete is tight in the musculature surrounding the hip joint. Analysing this athlete's squat pattern in the frontal plane indicates that the athlete may have a left lateral shift during the squat pattern, which is further supported here by the blue and red lines depicting the hip, knee and ankle joint position during the squat pattern. The footage here implies that the athlete cannot activate in the right glute, and as such causes the right hip internal rotation and knee valgus shown in the video. This implies that the athlete in question has both a strength deficit and a mobility deficit surrounding the hip joint. A squat variation pattern with an alternative loading strategy such as a goblet squat, as shown here in the video, by nature will reduce the torque demand at the hip, shift this torque demand more anteriorly, and therefore allow the athlete to exert a more favourable movement pattern in coherence with the technical model. If still struggling to maintain favourable lower body kinematics, this can be regressed to a counterbalance squat, which, as you can see in the video here, further reduces hip internal rotation and knee valgus in the right limb, previously shown in the videos. Both the goblet and counterbalance variations of the squat should be used alongside general hip mobility and myofascial release in the musculature surrounding the hip. Further, this should be complemented by simple hip conditioning exercises, single leg glute bridge or hip thrust variations, banded crab walks, banded monster walks, and fire hydrant or donkey kick variations. which will essentially promote activation of the glutes, specifically the glute meds, in order to reduce the internal rotation of the hip and the knee valgus in the right limb. Moving forward, the next part of this video will assess the barbell hinge. The athlete here is attempting to exhibit a barbell hinge pattern. As we can see here in the video, the athlete initially adopts a squat or a conventional deadlift pattern to attempt to follow the cues given to him, then correcting himself in order to keep the knees soft and lock them off, only decreasing the angle at the hip, following which he is unable to stabilise through his spine, therefore entering lumbar flexion, and as a result fails to dissociate his spine from his hips in order to move the hips back in a straight line. To promote favourable kinematics in the spine region, the athlete here works through a dowel hinge or a pole hinge, during which the pole has to stay in contact with the back of his head, between his shoulder blades and the base of his spine. Similarly to before, the athlete is cued to brace, to squeeze his shoulders together and down, and move the hips back in a straight line. As you can see here, the athlete self-corrects for a loss of contact between the base of his spine and the pole by softening the knees, and as such is beginning to exhibit a more favourable movement pattern with regards to the trunk. Once this has been established, this can be complemented with a banded hip hinge, which again encourages the athlete to make the hips track back, keeping soft knees and maintaining the spinal position established in the previous exercise. And finally, if satisfied that the athlete can be loaded through this pattern, progressions of the exercise may be used first in order to further that progression towards the establishment of a successful barbell hinge in coherence with the technical model. For example, the dumbbell goat bag exercise shown here. In summary, it's clear that regression of the exercise here has allowed the athlete to join the dots and successfully execute a hinge pattern, which can then, as aforementioned, be progressed back towards the original movement pattern. The final part of this video will observe the barbell hinge pattern for the athlete with a capacity deficit. As we can see in this video, the athlete is demonstrating a favourable movement pattern in the barbell hinge when unloaded, squeezing the shoulders down and together, maintaining a strong and favourable spinal position in relation to the hips, keeping soft knees and decreasing the angle at the hips only. However, when observing a loaded hinge, we can see clear evidence of the athlete's inability to move the hips back continually as he increases his depth into the barbell hinge, and as such, as a compensatory mechanism, enters lumbar flexion as well as scapular protraction in order to attain a greater depth in the hinge. This is shown by the red lines indicating difference in the shoulder position relative to the hip, despite no further backwards tracking of the hip position. This loss in structural integrity of the spine during the barbell hinge is potentially due to tightness in the musculature surrounding the hip joint, specifically featuring in the posterior chain, which results in a loss of pelvic control and the adoption of a lumbar flexion pattern in order to increase range during the hinge. As a way of combating this, general myofascial release work and hip mobility work should feature with this athlete moving forward in order to reduce the impact of range of motion on the extent of pelvic control during the hinge pattern. To complement this, the athlete should undertake bracing or strengthening techniques which aim to target the ability to resist flexion or extension of the lumbar spine, and as such will both heighten the athlete's knowledge and kinesthetic feel of good pelvic control, in addition to increasing the strength throughout the trunk region. Finally, in order to address the scapular protraction during the hinge pattern, the athlete should work through horizontal pull patterns in order to increase strength in this region. Observing the athlete's neutral posture at the top of the hinge, slight scapular protraction is already present, indicating that the athlete's posterior upper body strength is superseded by that of the anterior musculature. As such, exercises shown here, such as the single arm dumbbell row, should be used to increase strength in the retractors of the scapula, namely traps, lats and rhomboids, in order to limit any scapular protraction due to an imbalance of strength in the upper body, in conjunction with, as aforementioned, general shoulder conditioning work in order to, again, increase strength in this region. Combining all of these aspects of the intervention will allow the athlete to safely work through a hinge pattern in greater coherence with the technical model, sustaining good quality pelvic control and maintaining stability of the spine and the shoulder blades. In summary, the barriers to the performance of the two movement patterns and the attached interventions have contrasted the two athletes observed for each movement pattern, demonstrating that the concepts of skill and capacity are interrelated. Competency in movement is contingent upon the athlete's comprehension of the task at hand, and then facilitated by the physiological aptitudes, or in the case of the second and fourth athletes in this video, the restrictions that have been developed. The satisfying of one construct underpins that of the other, and as such, both are fundamental to the expression of the most effective movement pattern. Thanks for watching.